today's economy, the publishing industry continues to shrink and change as e-books are becoming more popular and bookstores are closing. I'm Esther Bloom. To learn how this has affected one writer, we are so pleased to have a return visit from Caitlin Rother, a Pulitzer-nominated investigative journalist who is living her dream of becoming a published author of riveting true crime thrillers. Welcome back to Pace TV.
Thank you for having me back.
Oh, it's going to be fun, I know. How have you managed to stay afloat during these tough transition years?
Well, I got out of newspapers just as newspapers were starting to shrink and dwindle, and I didn't realize this, but the publishing industry was on its way to do the very same thing. So what I've ended up doing is I've been writing more than one book at a time and juggling, essentially, diversifying and expanding into lots of new areas that are related to being an author, which I think people don't really understand is all the life of an author. So speaking engagements, more of that, more going on TV and being paid as an expert to give my opinion on cases, sometimes the cases I'm not even covering, and working on multiple projects all at once and teaching and consulting and, blah, blah, blah. It just goes on and on. I'm very busy.
Well, how have you managed to create any balance in your life with all this that's happening?
Very carefully.
Yeah. Has anything really outstanding happened to you since we saw you last?
Yes. As a matter of fact, in October, I co-authored a book which hit the New York Times bestseller list. It's my first, and I'm very excited about it. It's called My Life Deleted. And it's the story of a former NFL football player who fell down in the men's room, hit his head, and lost his entire long-term memory, all 46 years of it, so that he didn't even know who he was, he didn't know who his wife was, he didn't even know what a wife was. So he basically lost all of his thoughts, his memories, his language were just slipping away in a matter of a couple hours in the emergency room. And when that was over, he was almost like a newborn in a 46-year-old man's body and had to relearn the world. So it was a pretty fascinating story. It's a love story, it's a medical story, it's a psychological story, and an inspirational story.
Is it a true story?
And it's a true story.
A true story. So what category would it be in?
It's a memoir.
A memoir.
It's Scott Bowles, and he's the person that I helped write the book. So.
And how is he faring now?
Well, his memory still hasn't come back, and it is a love story. I don't want to give it all away, but he did fall in love with his wife again, which was, a question because she was a stranger to him.
Oh my!
So it's a great story.
It sounds so inspirational. The fact that despite it all, he could still write.
Well, and the thing is, it could have happened to anyone. I mean, anyone could have walked into that men's room and fallen down. So, I mean, it's also about the fragility of life, and that he had an opportunity, if you want to look at it in an optimistic way, he had a second opportunity to do his life over again, become a different person if he wanted to be. So it's actually a fascinating question.
True.
Yeah.
Well, the fact that he lived through it is extraordinary, because I just heard a story yesterday of a man who was helping his neighbor and fell off a ladder and did not survive. And this was only one of those 6-foot ladders.
Right.
It wasn't a huge distance, but it was enough to end his life. And so we really have to count our blessings.
Yes.
And find the gift in adversity.
Absolutely.
But we've been waiting with bated breath to find out what you have done in the meanwhile to continue your pursuing your dream. What other books have aired in this time?
Well, in the past, as of July, will be my 6th book in 18 months, and that's counting some re-releases, 2 re-releases. One, Poison Love, which was my very first book. In order to keep your books in print, you have to keep people buying them, and so my way of doing that was to provide an additional 20 new pages as an update to bring everybody up to date. So it was very recent that I could put in all the new information about Kristen Rossum's appeals and the outcome of her wrongful death case in civil court, some changes at the medical examiner's office, which I was never able to get information about while I was still working at the newspaper because they had the civil suit pending and they didn't want to say anything that they had done wrong in case it affected the lawsuit. So now that all that's over, I was able to find out that this case really had pretty broad ramifications, not just locally, but nationally, that they've changed the way that they keep drugs in medical examiner's office, because basically what happened is this young toxicologist managed to steal drugs from the lab and poison her husband with them.
And so what was the outcome of her appeal?
Well, she's still in prison, so she
She's
got
still
some
in
traction with the Ninth Circuit Appeals Court, but the Attorney General's office won the next round, and it's still pending, though. Her
So
attorney
does
is
she
still
have an
fighting it.
opportunity to keep appealing to the Supreme
She's still
Court?
got another step or two, yes.
Okay. Well, that's interesting, the fact that she is not giving up on it, but yet not being encouraged by the results of each one.
Well, actually, the Ninth Circuit was actually a very encouraging decision. It was a 3-0 vote on the three-judge panel, and that they wanted to give her a new hearing to decide whether to give, to retest the autopsy specimens, because fentanyl is the drug that was deemed to have killed her husband, Greg DeVillers, and yet they have a new expert on the defense side who basically says that the prosecution's theory and the defense theory, neither one makes any sense when you take into account how fentanyl actually works. So it's a pretty fascinating appeal. So I had a lot to say in my 20 pages.
Yeah, well, can they still make determinations after all this time?
They can retest the autopsy specimens to see whether there is something called metabolites in the blood, which means that the fentanyl was taken before he died, whereas if there are no metabolites, that means that the specimens got contaminated in the lab after he died.
So do they hold on to these specimens for any length of time?
They do, in case there's a retrial. I mean, theoretically, they're supposed to, and hopefully that they don't degrade too much so that you can still tell what drugs are in there.
Is there an indefinite period of time for them to hold on to these things?
Well, I think they just hold on to them, yes, but I'm just saying scientifically they may not be good or there may not be enough left, but we didn't get that far because they didn't end up having one of the hearings, so we'll see what happens.
And you were working on a case about these two people who
the anchor?
Yeah, that anchor story, yeah.
Tom and Jackie Hawks.
Yeah.
Owned a yacht. They had retired. They were living their dream at sea, and they decided to sell their yacht so that they could be with their new grandbaby back in Arizona. And they advertised. They advertised both with a broker and not with a broker, because when you advertise without a broker, you can save a commission that you don't have to pay. So Tom Hawks was hoping to save about $50,000 on a $480-something thousand boat, and a guy comes along named Skylar DeLeon, who he doesn't know this, but he's a con man, and he pretends that he wants to buy this boat, and he tells him, I was on the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, a kids show on Saturday morning, and made money in real estate, and I have money, I want to buy your boat, and I want to use it as a charter and fishing business for me and my family. We're going to live on the boat. And so the Hawks were a little bit reticent, and so Skylar brought his wife onto the boat with their 10-month-old daughter, and she was pregnant. So immediately they trusted them and thought, oh, they're just this nice young couple who's trying to build toward the American dream. And so Skylar, talks it up a bit, and they decide they're about to buy it. He says, well, I want to take it on a sea trial, and I want to go look underneath the hull to make sure everything's good. So he brings on board a couple guys, one really big guy and one smaller guy, and says, these are my friends. And they basically have this whole scheme where they separate the couple above and below. They blindfold them and handcuff them and basically force them to sign power of attorney documents. And then they tie them to the anchor and throw the anchor overboard and let the weight of the anchor pull them to their death. And it was the most horrible, horrible way to die. And Skylar wanted the boat. And he thought that they were rich, and he wanted everything in their bank accounts. So that was his plan.
But how were they caught?
Well, what Skylar didn't know was that Tom Hawks' brother is a retired police chief from Carlsbad. And Tom Hawks was used to be a firefighter in Carlsbad. And Jim Hawks, the retired police chief, his daughter was a police officer in Escondido. So this is a law enforcement family. And so they knew that something was wrong, and they immediately started doing some digging on themselves. And when they handed in a missing persons report, they already had labeled Skylar DeLeon as a suspect when they gave it to the Newport Beach Police Department to start investigating. So they had a head start, and immediately, Jim Hawks knew that something was wrong.
So did this ever come to trial?
Oh, absolutely. Skylar and the big guy that he brought on board, they're both now on death row. And Jennifer DeLeon, she got life without parole as well. So 3 convictions. There were 5 defendants, 3 trials that I went to up in Orange County. It took me 5 years to write the book.
And actually, how did you learn of the conversations that ensued?
Well, I do great detailed investigations, and I do my own interviewing, but I also, when I have a very cooperative police department, which I did, they were great. They let me use their, some of their witness interviews that they did themselves. So, and I sat through all 3 trials, and I had all kinds of information that I got out of the court evidence, and really went to town on it. I had to cut 200 pages. The book was so long.
Oh my goodness. Were you able to interview the perpetrators at all?
I interviewed Skylar 4 times in jail before he went to death row.
Was he willing to talk?
We talked a lot about the fact that he wanted a sex change operation. So that was one of his motives, that he wanted the money. He had basically put down $500, a deposit on this $15,000 sex change operation. He had it scheduled for 2 weeks after the murder, and he didn't have the money because they were about $100,000 in debt. So he wanted to be a woman. That's most of what he wanted to talk about. So my goal was to try to get him to talk about some other things too.
Did he have any remorse?
No, I wouldn't say he did. No, he didn't. I don't think he even understood what remorse was. Because I tried to talk to him about that.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, are you going to say anything at the sentencing hearing? Because that's your chance, do you have anything that you want to say to the Hawks? And he basically just had this blank look on his face, and he kind of, I think, knew that he was supposed to say that he was sorry. He just moves his lips and doesn't really mean anything by what he said. So.
Yeah. Well, speaking of remorse, I know you were going to be interviewing John Gardner, and that was so close to home.
Yes.
For all of us in San Diego. I mean, it was something happening in our own backyard. So how did that happen, that you were able to write that book?
Well, I was here in the community where I live, and I was watching all of this unfold on TV and in the newspaper, and I was amazed. I mean, I saw a flyer over at the gym for Chelsea King, and I'd never seen a flyer for a missing teenager before at the gym or anywhere else for that matter. And I thought, well, this is interesting. I wonder what this is about, because normally the only thing that I ever see in San Diego, on telephone poles are missing dogs and cats. I'd never seen such an outpouring of support and interest in trying to find a young girl. So that was interesting to me. And then I noticed online, and I'm watching TV, and it just seems that this was such a huge story. And I'd never seen such an outpouring of love and support, such emotions. And then when they found her panties, and they were able to link John Gardner by his DNA, and they arrested him, I, on the other end of that spectrum, had never seen such anger at a murder defendant. And I just thought, I really didn't want to write about another serial killer rapist, because I'd done that once before, and it was a very difficult period of time for me to have to be in that person's head. But I said, this really needs to be written. I don't think we know enough about sexual predators that we can protect ourselves. And it seemed that there were so many flaws in the system. There were things that went wrong. I mean, I was just fascinated to find out, what did his mother really know? Everyone was blaming her. What's her story? And so I approached her, and it took me a while, but she decided to allow me to interview her and interview members of her family, and really do a very in-depth look at the backstory of who he was and how he got to be the person who was able to commit such horrible crimes, because I think we can learn from that. And I think, my goal is to try to do something positive with this book to try to prevent tragedies like this from occurring again.
And what did you learn?
Well,
was it preventable?
I think that's a very difficult question to ask. I mean, there's so many issues that I found along the way in the criminal justice system, in the mental health system, And in the corrections system, these agencies seem like they're not talking to each other. There were probes and investigations, and Chelsea's Law, everybody was so happy that that got passed, but then the key components of it didn't get funded. And so I discuss quite a bit of that in the book, but I also go into a lot of good things too about what the sheriff's department did right. They did a great job, and they did it so quickly. I was very impressed with that. And I know the Escondido police, when they were looking for Amber, really tried very, very much as they could to find her. And I think they made some mistakes too. But I go into all of that and some behind the scenes information about finding Amber's remains and the plea bargain, all the kinds of stuff that didn't get into the newspaper.
Oh, well, that's got to be fascinating, because those are questions that I had.
Right.
Like, how could they have found the remains? How could they have it? I have to buy the book, I guess, to find out.
Well, he took them there. He took them there.
No, but still, in a wilderness. I mean, how?
You get the whole scene in the book.
Oh, it's extraordinary.
And I tried to be as sensitive, though, as I could, because I don't want to upset the families with giving, there's no gory details about.
Did you talk to the families as well?
I wasn't able to do that. I really wanted to, and I tried, but I understand they've been going through a tremendous amount of grief, and don't think they want to deal with this. So. And
did you get to meet him?
Oh, yes, I did. I spoke with him. He was actually very cooperative with this project, and I need everybody to know that nobody got paid for anything. He didn't get any money. None of his family got any money. They just wanted the story told properly and in depth, and not in sound bites, and not take things taken out of context. So that's how I got them to trust me to do it, because I told them I was going to tell their whole story. I'm not going to judge them. I'm not going to take sides. That's for the readers to decide. What went wrong and what they could have done differently. It's not my place to do that.
Well, it must be difficult for you when you're investigating all of these cases to remain objective about it, because we all have our biases, and the horror of most of these tragedies is such that to find some redeeming quality in it is really very important, that you can put that aside and just go for the facts.
Well, I think in this case, it's very important for people to understand that a sexual predator doesn't have a big S on his forehead. When I sat down and talked to him for 5 hours, if I didn't know what he had done, I wouldn't have known. No. He's a very charming, friendly person. And that's how he managed to manipulate people and manipulate his family, and his, some of his friends and his ex-girlfriends had only, nice things to say about who he was when they knew him, and what a protector he was and a nurturing person. So it's very bizarre that he could have these two very distinct and very different sides to him. But I think people need to understand that, that I'm not trying to be sympathetic, but you need to know that people are not always what they seem. And Skylar DeLeon was the same. He sung to me in jail, and he was very charming and funny, and you just can't tell. And you turn around and slit your throat.
In a way, it's kind of frightening.
Yeah.
Because you can be so easily taken in by these characters.
And people are.
And not be suspicious of their motives.
Right.
And how did his mother feel about this? Did she have any guilt?
Well, I would like people to really read her story in this book carefully and in depth, and try to have an open mind, because there's a lot of backstory for her and who she is, and the whole family, is very dysfunctional. So it's not just her. There's sisters, there are aunts and grandmothers, and it's a big extended family with a lot of problems. And so, she thought that he was using drugs, and that's what she was worried about, that he had disappeared and she didn't know where he was. But in her mind, he was never capable of doing something like this. And whether you want to say she was in denial, read the book and see for yourself. But she felt horrible. I know she feels horrible. And she says she dreams about Chelsea and Amber every night. And she feels so bad about it.
Well, the whole community does. I have never seen such an outpouring of empathy
Right.
for the family. I mean, and it's ongoing too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the parents are extraordinary
Mm-hmm.
in that they have put aside their grief and put it to some use, made
Mm-hmm.
some, created some purpose
Mm-hmm.
so that some good has come out of this.
Right.
And
I'm trying to do the same thing. So, I mean, I understand that they may not like everything that they read in the book if they decide to read the book, but that's certainly not my intention. My intention is to do something positive.
well, if they decide to read the book, when is it going to hit the stands?
It'll be out on July 3rd.
July 3rd. Well, it'll
And
be.
I'm very proud of it. So I worked very hard on this book. It was a very, very difficult book to write because there was so much sensitivity that I needed to take, and that everybody was so nervous about saying the wrong thing and upsetting someone, and
Yes.
so it was very difficult.
Yes. I know, and you probably have to worry about not adding to
Right.
people's grief
Right,
by
and I don't want to do that.
offending them
Right.
as well, and that makes you very cautious as a
Mhm.
writer.
Right.
Is that an innate characteristic of yours, or is it part of your training as a writer?
I think it's an innate characteristic of mine. I don't know that every single reporter is like that, because, you know, there's some people who are drawn to this type of writing, and, you know, I really have to have a lot of empathy and compassion, and I have to keep an open mind. And I am very analytical, and I weigh the facts. I mean, when I was sitting in front of John Gardner, believe me, the night before I had to meet with him, I was scared that he was maybe going to lunge across the table and grab my throat. I didn't sleep much the night before. But, you know, I guarantee you he wouldn't have known that while I was sitting there, because I'm a professional and I try to keep those emotions in check, and I just don't think about it.
So are you protected in any way when you meet with them?
It was like this, just like this.
And
And
nobody.
there was a guard over to the side.
Oh.
So by the time
In the same room.
we were in a lunchroom where Charles Manson's family also visits, because he's in the same unit as Charles
Oh.
Manson. So I was thinking I might see him, but he wasn't there that day.
So have you changed your goals in terms of the direction that you want your life to take?
Well, I really enjoy what I'm doing, but honestly, I would really like to slow down the book writing and try to move into some other directions. So I've actually started moving more into public speaking, and I'm trying to move some more into TV as well, because I really enjoy it, and I'm, you know, putting together a TV reel of all my segments, and because I've been doing this now for about 8 years, doing these interviews, and I'd like to move more into that somehow.
Well, I imagine that you will.
Thank you.
I think you are very determined.
I am.
And, you know, people have dreams, but they just remain as dreams because you have to give them a little nudge. You know, you have to make things happen.
And take risk. A
and
lot of risk.
You actually left a good paying job with benefits.
Right.
And went out on a limb, but you did more than just hang on the limb. You have actually made that limb grow and blossom.
Thank you.
You've done so much that I am so impressed by
thank you.
what you've accomplished. Now,
It's all about letting go of the fear.
I think the fear is what controls a lot of people.
And it's hard. I mean, it's not an easy thing, but you have to do that.
What was your fear? Was it a fear of failure?
Becoming a bag lady, not making it. No, maybe no one will buy the book or the next book. Maybe I won't get another book deal. But I mean, I just work as hard as I can, and I do. You know, I keep standards really high, and I just keep working at it. And I learn, you know, I keep trying to learn all the time, and I'm watching the industry. I'm looking for new directions to go into. I try to keep abreast with social media and anything that's new that might be helpful for me. I learn from other authors who are successful. I read their websites. I read a lot of industry news. So I'm constantly growing and trying to find new challenges and meet them.
Well, how did you learn of your success of being on the Times bestseller list? That's quite a coup. How did it come to you?
Well, I got a call from one of my co-authors. And,
really?
And yeah, from Scott's wife, Joan. She called me and she told me that we had hit the bestseller list, and I said, "What?"
You mean they never They never let you know?
Well, no, you actually find out as an author, you find out a couple weeks before it actually hits the list, because it's that week that the sales hit a certain mark, and then, your editor tells you, but it doesn't actually get published for a couple more weeks. So we found out before it actually hit, and I have to tell you, it was one of the most exciting things, because that's been a dream of mine, a goal of mine.
Oh,
so.
my, I would
And it's helped.
imagine it'd be anybody's dream. I mean, that's a peon of success when it comes to writing a book. If you make that bestseller list and you stay on it for any length of time, I mean, that's enough to brag about for the rest of your life.
Well, thank you. And you were mentioning earlier about ebooks. We actually hit the ebook list first. So we sold, I forget how many it was, and I probably shouldn't say anyway, but it was a lot. Basically, what we think was that everybody who was watching Dr. Phil downloaded on their Kindle during the hour.
Okay, so you don't consider this new technology as a threat?
Well, it's not a threat if you look at it in terms of it's making more people read, it's making people read more books when they're reading, and people are more willing to buy books because they're cheaper. Now, the problem is we're still in this transition period where authors like me have some old contracts, so the percentages of the royalties are still very low, and yet we're selling more ebooks, or as many ebooks, at least in the mass market paperback market, than other books.
So are there different categories in terms of royalties where books are concerned, like hardcover,
Yes.
paperback?
Yes.
What's the order of it? Hardcover, paperbacks, and ebooks?
Well, it's totally in transition. So,
Oh.
when I first started the ebook, I didn't even know what an ebook was. I don't think there even were ebooks. And that was only 2005, my first book came out.
Oh.
So, from there, now when I'm looking at my sales, the ebooks and the paperback books are almost equal much of the time. And My Life Deleted is still selling better in hardcover for some reason. I don't know why, but that's unusual. So the percentages, though, with the new contracts for the ebooks have gone up significantly. So even though the price tag is lower, the percentage is higher. And so I'm able actually to make a little bit more money than I was, but it took a little while for that to settle out.
Well, who makes the determination about how a book is to be published?
The publisher.
Does it come out in hardcover first, or
Well,
not?
I have my mass market paperbacks on Dead Reckoning and Poison Love and Lost Girls are all with the same publisher, and they just do mass market paperback, so it goes straight
Okay.
to paperback. And it didn't used to go straight to ebook. Sometimes it would take years to go to ebook because they print a bunch of them up and they want to sell them. And if they start selling the ebooks, then the printed copies are going to sit in the warehouse, which costs money for storage. And
Well, I think that ebooks have almost become a status symbol. I mean, people wanting to, be seen at a lunch counter reading the
Oh, you think so?
ebook. But anyway, it's been a joy to see you again and to hear of your new success.
Thank you.
And I hope that you continue along those lines, and we'll meet again.
Oh, good. I hope so. Thank you very
Yes.
much.
Just keep that prolific mind of yours going.
Okay.